Thanks for listening to the podcast. We've got a ton of great content that covers the full journey of deploying a branded employee app. Go to staffbase.com, click on resources, and select Employee App Guide. That's it. Best wishes and back to the show. Hello and welcome. Today we are talking with engagement mastermind, Kristin Hancock. Kristin, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. That's quite the intro. I should write my intros more often.
We were going to go with Jedi Master, but we thought, just mastermind is just a little bit more exceptional for, for this conversation.
Totally. And at the risk of alienating many of your listeners, I have never seen Star Wars, so Jedi doesn't really make much sense for me to use.
All the better then. That's good. All right. So we're good move on not using Jedi. That's fantastic. We're going to talk today about finding your voice as an internal communicator. You and I had a really good offline chat about this ahead of time, and I'm really excited about this. But before we dive into that topic, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you do, and why everyone that meets you thinks you're pretty awesome?
I hope that's exactly what people think when they meet me. Well, I'm often the token Canadian at events. So I'm from a very small town in the province of Manitoba in Canada. The town is called Oak Bluff. Last population count, I think we were at 300 and something people, so it's a thriving metropolis. But I live in Winnipeg, which is a little bit more of a bigger center. I started off my journey into communications by going into business. That was my first university attempt. And at the encouragement of some high school guidance counselors who said to me, I know you don't really love math, but there's not that much math. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that sounds fine. And then I got through part of my first year and realized it's all math. That's what business is. So through random flukes of looking for things for some other people, stumbled into communications and realized that I could do that for a living, and I could write and speak and, do all these really cool things, and that was a job that I didn't realize before. So that's how I ended up in communications. I have always Winnipeg's a relatively small city, so that's allowed me to do communications for all different kinds of organizations and also doing all different kinds of communications. So started out doing PR and media relations and some fundraising and external communications, you name it. And then really realized that internal was my passion and where I felt that the communications world and the business world could make the most impact. So that's where I've attached myself to.
Interesting. And so I think this is actually something I wanted to tap onto that you were just talking about that I don't think it gets talked enough about, quite frankly, is this word internal communicators. Like, I think it resonates pretty well with most of the people that are listening, but I hear internal communications a lot, and I think that it gets sort of taken for granted what it actually means. And you saying that this is your passion, I'd love to just have you expand a little bit more about what specifically about internal communications really gets your energy going.
You bring up an interesting point about the term internal communications, because in working now with clients, there was one of the very first conversations I had after I started my own business last fall was with the founder of a company. And I made comment to him about, what I'm really focusing on in my work is internal communications. And he looked at me and said, well, what's that? And it was this really powerful moment where I realized that internal communicators are often talking about internal communications, but business leaders don't always speak that same language. When I said to him, it's about your employees being fulfilled at work. It's about how the employee experience is, whether that's onboarding or training or all those kinds of pieces. And when I started describing it in workplace culture, those terms he understood. Of course he understands them. He started a business. But when I said internal communications, he was like, I don't know what that is. So I think a lot of it is using the right language for who we're speaking to and what we're explaining, and digging a little bit deeper, because internal communications is very broad. So I like, part of why I've become so passionate about it is because I've seen the impact in both ways. So I've seen the really positive impact when you have a thriving culture and employees who are fulfilled and enjoy coming to work every day. And I've also seen the other side of it where people don't want to go to work every day and they dread being there and everyone just sits at their desks. I'm sure you have too. We all probably have.
Yeah, and I think that really starts to open that little door that says, okay, what exactly are we trying to accomplish here? And I think a lot of the conversations I'm having with other folks, and I'm sure you're just constantly hearing this struggle, which is just how do I find ways to get folks to read, respond, and be active participants in my communication strategy, and I'm just so curious where you have found the most success and just where you see these struggles and why they exist in the first place.
We talk a lot about, or we question a lot about why people aren't reading what we're putting out. Why aren't people paying attention? Why aren't people listening? Why is no one responding to what we're putting out there? And I think the question should be, are we listening? And I think that question should come first. And, in many ways, maybe it's like parenting or, even training a pet for that matter. Like, why aren't they doing what I want them to do? Are you listening and are you paying attention to what their natural state is and what their behavior is? And maybe we're not. And I think for me, that's the biggest first step. So stepping back, looking at the big picture, but also looking at the little nuances. What is your culture in its default state? And once you have that data, then you get to look at why aren't people communicating? Why aren't people reading? Why aren't people, active participants in these conversations? But I think until you look at that initial state, it's not going to help you to build anything without knowing that.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know you mentioned earlier offline about the phrase communication strategy, and maybe it sends a few chills down your spine hearing it. I'd love to get your feedback on that specifically.
Yeah, I will. That's not my favorite word. I used to joke in my last role that one of my least favorite words was policy. Another least favorite word of mine was report. And I will say communication strategy might be up there as well. Having said that, it doesn't mean it's not important. But I think when we build out a strategy, we are often building strategies. I'm guilty of doing this myself. We're often building strategies based on a template and based on textbook examples of what a strategy should look like. And I would love to see us build strategies that take into account that natural state of an organization instead of just, this is how you build a strategy, fill in the gaps or fill in the pieces. Because for me, it's not a one size fits all.
That's a really interesting point. And it reminds me of, I saw someone post the other day on LinkedIn about, they're like, please don't say that you're trying to just delight your customers. I feel like communication strategy, delight your customers, it's almost like people are looking for the easy button. If they could just find I just need a communication strategy and everything will be fine. It's like, okay, I feel like, and the same thing with delight your customers. Like, of course you want to delight your customers. Of course you need a communication strategy, but let's talk about what that means. Let's get tactical about it. And then I feel like if you can back it up with why, and not just why, but actually the how aspect of it, then okay, sure, that it becomes a lot more tangible. Yes. But I hear you. It's like sometimes you hear these words and you're like, okay, that's fine, but let's drill a little bit further down into that to understand what you're actually trying to solve here.
Well, I think leaders, I've been asked many times by leaders, well, we need to be strategic. We need to be strategic. Well, no shit. What else are you doing all day? But I think we get caught up in this, be strategic means build a strategy. And I think we're jumping ahead sometimes. We're not looking at where we're at right now, and what the reality of your workplace is. And I think you need to do that before you're looking at all these wonderful ping pong tables that you're going to put in the lunchroom.
Absolutely. And I think to your point earlier, it's just about taking a big step back and trying to understand what is your culture and what is your idea of what culture is supposed to be. And then really start to ask people, what is it that what is your interpretation of that? Here's what we think it is. Do you feel that way? And then from there, you can start to develop, okay, well, I can certainly see where we're lacking and where we need to improve, et cetera, and see what resonates as well. Part of what you were just talking about made me think of, okay, well, having this strategy in place is one thing, but also there's going back to that easy button. There's this tendency to say, okay, well, what I need is something new, something different that'll shake it up. So we talk a lot about mobile and mobile technologies being, okay, well, that's definitely the answer. If I just go mobile, everybody will have access to the information. And well, guess what? It turns out that even if you use a shiny new amazing tool such as mobile or whatever it may be, that doesn't change a crappy communications plan. If it's not working in whatever way that you're sending and sharing this information, it's still not good on a new shiny tool. And I'd love to get your feedback or some of your experiences on that.
That's like a spoiler alert thing, right?
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, if you launch a new intranet app, shiny tool, insert shiny tool name here, but your workplace culture sucks, the tool isn't going to work. That's just how it goes. You can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. But I think that's where being brutally honest about your current state and recognizing that launching a tool in that current state means the tool is going to reflect that state. If you're in an amazing place and you've got a very fulfilled, energized workforce, great. Then maybe that's a great time to launch a tool. If you have cultural problems and you have communication problems without that tool, then there are probably deeper rooted issues that you need to sort out before launching that. Interesting, I launched an intranet at a previous job, and one of the things we found that after we launched that we didn't realize beforehand was that the demographic of people that were using this tool was a demographic that was not native to platforms like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of those social networking platforms. And so when we launched it, they didn't understand I'll call it the culture of liking something or commenting on something. That was new to them. And it was a really eye-opening experience for us that we were like, well, why is no one engaging? Why is no one commenting? No one's, we're the only ones who are liking these posts. Well, because they didn't understand the nature of how that works, because the social media mindset wasn't something that was inherent to them. So.
And that goes into something too that I think is, I've been hearing from, I was doing an interview I want to say a month ago, and I was talking and her thing was she was kind of a team of one, right, for about 2,000 or 3,000 people. And she said the only way that she feels that she's been so successful is by finding internal influencers. And the more I hear about that, the more, people are looking for familiar faces. And if they can hear it from those types of folks, that can really help. I'd love to understand, and I think you and I are in agreement on finding influencers is absolutely a great thing, but how to find them is a whole nother journey. And I'd love to get your feedback on that.
I worry a little bit about using the word influencers, but I agree. I don't know what else to call them at this point. I don't want to use evangelists either, but maybe champions is a better term. The reason the term influencer makes me nervous is because it's starting to evolve on social media into this dishonest kind of, like, we're starting to learn now that all of these accounts with millions of followers don't really have millions of followers, and it's a bit of a lie. And but to your point of finding people within your organization who are champions of your messaging, that is, I think, the secret sauce in launching a new tool, in, rolling out a new strategy, whatever it might be, because those are the people that are going to help you get there. On the flip side, I will also say, specifically in terms of launching a new tool, that leaning into your skeptics can also be incredibly powerful. One of the things that I've done with launching new tools is finding people in the organization who are either skeptical or who are not tech savvy at all, who are not glued to their iPhones, who are not, mobile friendly kinds of people. Because if you can bring them on early, they will become champions because they'll feel empowered. They'll feel like they've learned something new. They'll be telling everyone else, oh, there's this great tool. There's all these cool things you can do with it because it's new to them, right? A lot of us are used to social media and being online 24/7. And so when a new tool is launched, we're like, yeah, cool. It's a new app. That's cool. Yep. I know how to use that. I use apps all the time. If you can get someone who isn't comfortable in that space to become comfortable in that space, they are going to jump all over it and be your biggest fans. And I think that's something to keep in mind too.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. We've got a ton of great content that covers the full journey of deploying a branded employee app. Go to staffbase.com, click on resources, and select Employee App Guide. That's it. Best wishes and back to the show. Oh, I love that. I mean, that reminds me of several years ago, I was working for an organization, and we were pushing out new types of email technology. And it was usually on the leadership level, they would have someone that controlled their lives. They were the people that were managing their email, managing their calendars, managing their documentation. So if that person couldn't buy into this new technology, oh boy, there was a lot of trouble. And so being able to find a way to work with those folks and say, all right, talk to me about your concerns. Help me understand where you're seeing problems. Why doesn't this seem like a good idea for you? Because, from there, work backwards and say, well, now I have a template of how to explain it. Because if you can understand it and you are absolutely against it, oh boy. And to your point, finding an influencer or a champion out of that is a wonderful. I do agree that the word influencer, it's starting to creep into a bad word. Yeah.
I think part of it too with, and I'm sure you see this all the time with launching an app in an organization or an intranet or whatever it might be, whatever digital tool it might be. It's fascinating how, yes, it's about the technology and it's about the tool, but it's so much more about the culture. If you have a culture where, like you say, we worry about leaders who are afraid of giving up control of the message, but also if you have a culture where leadership controls the message, you likely also have a culture where employees have a fear of owning that message as well. And so it's about flipping that whole script. So part of it is that leaders are comfortable letting other people be empowered to share a message, but also letting those other people know that it's okay for you to comment or post or share, like those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's such an interesting dynamic because you have these leaders that are just so desperate to. I was having a conversation with someone for a large global organization, and rewind 20 years ago, and it was a team of 15 people.
Yeah.
And they used to be able to sit around a pizza box and have a nice conversation and run the company.
Yep.
And now they have facilities that very likely some of leadership has never even set foot on.
Yeah.
Which is so, and I can sense that's a struggle. Like, how do you feel like, wow, I have my people that they don't even know who I am, maybe.
That's where internal communication professionals are the catalysts for that. And we need to own that role because we have an incredibly powerful position within the company because we touch all aspects of the business. And very few other positions have that exciting role. And so when it's scaling like that, and there's lots of groups I've worked with that are same thing. Well, we had 12 people and now we have 200, and we don't know how to scale that. How do we scale the pizza box meetings, right, into these town halls and everything else? And that's where we get to come in, and that's amazing.
I completely agree, and it has such an interesting effect on both sides of the pendulum, right? So on the one hand, there we have the leaders that are just, they want to be present at scale, to your point. But on the other hand, you have these, you could have, if you have a factory, you could have 2,000 workers that are, feet on the ground, that don't feel like they show up to work, they do their job, and they go home, and they feel completely distant from, or unaware of anything that is happening high above, if you will. And then by using internal communications, you completely change that and flip it on its head, and all of a sudden you're engaging with both sides, and that is so exciting.
It is exciting, yeah. And I don't think we own that like we could. Yes,
I think you're spot on. So you had a video that I was watching on YouTube, which I'll put in the show notes because it was really interesting, called Zero to Hero. And I think this is really relevant to the topic, which is just finding that voice, which we've been talking about. If you're an internal communicator, what is your voice? And you talked a lot about this Zero to Hero methodology. And in particular, you talked about just an interesting way of incorporating video into your strategy to help. I'd love to hear more about it.
Video is not something, so this is funny, going back to my college years, the communications program I did, in your first year, you learn a little bit of everything. So they had 4 areas. There was journalism, advertising, PR, and at the time it was called broadcast production. I think it's called media production now or something. Anyway, and so the broadcast production piece was TV studio work and film work and learning how to use the cameras and all that kind of stuff. And it was my least favorite of all 4 of those majors. So I did not major in broadcast production, but I knew enough to have conversations about it. And that's the important thing with communicators, whether it's accounting or video production or even coding or building websites. You need to know enough to have a conversation. You don't need to know how to do it yourself necessarily. So video production is not my area of expertise. I don't want it to be. It doesn't engage me at all. But there are luckily many people who are awesome at it. And I think the first part of that Zero to Hero talk that I've done at a number of different conferences talks about the power of video and what a difference it makes with internal communications. My first experience with that was when I was working for Ronald McDonald House. Again, one-person show, you're the communicator, you're the fundraiser, you're the volunteer coordinator, you're doing all these different jobs. And so for our volunteer appreciation evening, I thought, how cool would it be to put a video together? In hindsight, it really was more of a slideshow than a video. However, still something that had audio and had video and had impact. And volunteers, I still see that room because they saw themselves and they saw the impact that they had. And we had families share quotes about, I loved coming back to the house after being at the hospital all day, and it always smelled like cookies. And it just for them to see that impact was incredible and so moving. And that was that first foray into using video for volunteers, or I guess maybe a pseudo internal audience, but for that internal piece of it. We all share amazing advertising commercials that we see, or Superbowl ads, right? That's half the reason people don't like football, watch Super Bowl, is for the Superbowl ads, or maybe the only reason, because it's video, right? It's engaging, it's emotional, it tells a story. And if you are in internal comms, you are in sales, and you are in marketing, and you are in advertising, and you are in PR. And all of those departments use video to sell a product or a service. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be using video to sell an engagement story or a strategy or a new initiative or a new tool.
I am so glad you said it that way, in particular, because I have found when I'm looking at the internal comms industry of the United States, in particular the United States, not the rest of the globe, really focus on the United States. there's a huge, I could sit down at a conference for internal communicators, and I guarantee you maybe only one person at the table will actually have the phrase internal communicator in their title.
Yep, that's
There's
a great point.
huge chance that they're in PR, they're in HR, they're in marketing, or they're in sales, etc. And it's because of exactly the point you just nailed on. Because this hat that this person is wearing is so dynamic, so vast. I mean, you need to, you are a cheerleader on every possible aspect of the business in terms of creating and sharing a message. And I think that's why so many people get inherited into the role. And, that's really a really strong point. Any thoughts on that before I move on?
Well, what I was going to say to that is that internal comms is a relatively new field when you look at, the history of PR, say, or even the business world. And so many people who are internal communication professionals are not, that's not what they went to school for. That's not what they entered the working world to do. And so they generally have a background from somewhere else. Even for myself, my background originally in school was business and then became more sort of fundraising PR. That's an incredible background for internal comms, right? I could look at my 2 years trying to finish a business degree and go, oh, well, what a waste. I did financial accounting and I did organizational behavior. And no, that's so useful for internal communications. All of it is. So I think it's also a matter of recognizing that your background, I guarantee your background brings something really helpful to your role in internal comms.
Yeah. And it is so, I get so fascinated with, from a marketing perspective, that this whole topic is something that it's infuriating on one end. I guess I'm like, who are you? But on the other hand, it's so exciting because there's such a wide net of folks that could totally fit the role, be absolutely amazing. And a lot of the people that I talk to, that's exactly how they found themselves in the role in the first place, is leadership or anyone in an organization is like, you got to talk to Sarah. She's so amazing with how she can handle this and that. Maybe she was in marketing before, or maybe she's just an unbelievable sales representative. We've got to get her to figure out a way to do what she does out there externally, internally. How do we do that? And then voila, she's part of the industry now.
Right. Part of me wonders, this is possibly a tiny bit unethical, but part of me wonders if you posted a job ad for an internal comms role, but you didn't say it was an internal comms role, and you said, okay, I want someone who is a connector of people. I want someone who is very creative, who can do marketing, who can, target audiences and segmentation, all this kind of stuff. You'd get some amazing ad and PR and marketing people applying for it, and then say to them, oh yeah, but by the way, your audience is always going to be our employees, right? It's sort of, that's, I think, how we need to look at it.
Completely agree. And I think actually I unexpectedly, one of the more interesting examples when I was just learning about the industry, I think it was the medical medical group. There's usually a use of the word internal marketer or something like that. Or they actually look at it as you are a marketing person, but you're not marketing the hospital. You're marketing to the employees of the hospital.
Yeah.
And I found that really fascinating.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
I
just like, okay, well, that makes total sense. Yeah. Everything that you're trying to say is exactly what internal communications is about, but you're marketing. And I thought that really was interesting. To go back to video real quick, I think that one thing that you were talking about, especially with the Ronald McDonald House, for example, and it's when the production value and also just what the content is showing is so important. I think whenever I talk to someone that says, oh, I want to do video, but I'm worried about like, what equipment do I use? I don't know how to do video. It's like, no. If you have a camera, if you have a laptop, you can do video. Totally. Because at the end of the day, what matters is your message. What matters when you showed those pictures, even though you said it was more of a slideshow with audio, those memories, that's what made it work, right? Yes. And so and there's like when you have a floorman or a district manager for a logistics company that does a little "Hey, good morning" video. It could be on your iPhone. It doesn't matter. You know, that it's just the thought and the familiarity and the way that I can relate to that person. That's so much more important than any super cool equipment setup ever.
And do high production value videos have a place in the internal communications world? Of course they do.
Absolutely.
But like to your point, if you have a district manager who once a month shares a message about something, and they're sitting at their desk with using their iPhone to shoot a video, that's relatable, because I guarantee you the vast majority of your employees are not video production people. So in some ways, I think that makes them more relatable, and it's an easier kind of level playing field that, oh yeah, my district manager uses their iPhone to shoot video, so makes it on more on my level, right?
Completely agree. Yeah. So I'm going to jump back to this inherited role, which is, I find it so fascinating because, people are coming from all different realms of PR, HR, sales, etc. If you found someone that just started that role today, what would you say to them?
Welcome. Welcome to the best industry. I would ask lots of questions, because I would want to know where they came from. What business role were they in before? What industry were they in? Because there are all kinds of really useful nuggets that they're going to bring to this role. And I think if you are an adult and you have been employed anywhere, the value of internal comms. You just might not know that that's what it's called. If you are a cashier at Walmart, you understand what internal comms is, because I'm sure there were times where you didn't know something that you needed to know. Or maybe there are times that you went, oh yeah, no, I always find things out from my manager. And when I come in for my shift, I look at this board and that's where I see everything. You know what internal comms is. You just might not have known that it was called internal comms. So whatever you learned in your other roles about how you learned about new policies, say, or how you learned about a new initiative, or how you shared information about what your team was working on, all of that is useful to bring to this role, because you know what worked and you know what didn't work. So I think that's sort of curating all of that experience is what's going to be most helpful for you and make you the most successful.
That is so spot on. And it's, if I was in the role myself and I was just starting out, I would probably be a little terrified, but also trying to figure out what am I being measured against, and how am I going to be measured? And we did another episode with our CMO, and we talked all about measurement, talked all about the different different metrics that are available and out there, and there is no one metric. I think that's really what it comes down to. What are you finding that, if you were able to say, okay, can I at least list out some things that do matter, that do help, at the very least say, all right, these are some KPIs that I can look at to say, I'm doing good. Or I need to improve.
Yep. I think one of the first things I would tell, especially if someone was new to a role or new to internal comms, I would have a sneaking suspicion that the company they are working for might not be measuring things at all as they relate to internal comms. And so the reason that it's easy for us to not measure things is because it's never been done before. So there's a little bit of fear of the unknown, but there's also, I think, a little bit of laziness, where if it's not being done, why do you want to add more to your plate? Right? Why do we need to add? You're already got all kinds of things you need to get done. Measurement falls by the wayside then. But I think what looks amazing then is if you can define what your company should be measuring and how you can tie that to business outcomes. I certainly, if I was a manager and an employee came up to me and said, I know I'm new in this role and I noticed that we don't measure a lot of things, so here are some ideas for things I think we could be measuring to get a baseline and then set some goals from there. I'd be like, do you want my job? That's amazing. Right? I mean, that's a dream for most managers, to have an employee who's self-starting like that and aware enough to recognize those things. So I think the first thing is to not be afraid of looking at measurement and exploring what that might be for your role or your organization. In terms of KPIs and what to measure, I mean, like you said, there are hours and hours of podcasts that could talk about measurement alone. One of my favorite things that was measured, it's a little bit of a scary thing to measure, but on an employee survey at a place I worked once, they asked, would you recommend a friend to work here? Would you refer someone to work here? Excluding things about, yes, of course, you might not want to work with your friend, but excluding those kinds of factors, would you refer someone to work here? And I think that's a really powerful question to ask. Because if most people are saying no, well, that means that maybe they're sticking it out and I'll go through the motions to keep my job and keep my paycheck. But I don't know if I would tell someone else to work here. And I think that's a powerful question. The other powerful question that I love asking is how people feel on Sunday night. I think it's maybe a scary question to ask because you're going to get some answers that might make you think twice. But I think that says a lot about your culture, how people feel before the week starts, if you're working in a typical Monday to Friday kind of office.
I love that. I think one thing you said too, in particular, that really resonated with me was this word called fear. I feel a lot of it with folks. There's like, whether it's, and maybe it's because of the responsibility. I'm sending out this message that historically has been unsuccessful. Maybe they don't even want to hear the message. And so then they're the recipients of, that negative feedback. And it's just, and there's this, so I think in some of the conversations I've had, it feels like they're fearful of what's going to come back at them.
Right.
They're fearful of feeling that, okay, well, if it's unsuccessful, then whoever is in charge of what I'm doing is going to be unsatisfied with me as well. And you're just kind of getting hit from all these different angles. And so your questions about saying, how do you feel on Sunday night? How do you, would you recommend someone to work here? I love that. I think that kind of expands it outside of just communicating from a message standpoint, and it's communicating from a culture standpoint, which I like that quite a bit.
Well, and internal comms, as we've said, is a newer industry. And when an industry is newer, there's no charted path. So we are all doing that right now, and that's scary, but that's also really awesome that we get to create and invent and decide what is helpful for measurement and how we should be sharing messages. So I think there's a quote that I have on a card that I found at a Whole Foods one time. It's in I have it posted in my office, and it says, be nervous, but don't be afraid. So be nervous about things, but don't fear it. We need to flip this fear into an excitement about the industry and charting new territory for everyone.
I love that. That's great. And it is, you're so, yes, it is new. It is, and people are kind of figuring it out. But there's just so many great people like yourself that just can really help tap on those things and figure out different ways of like, okay, well, what is the message that we're trying to say? And I think to kind of summarize what you were talking about, it keeps coming back to culture and what do we want to be as a company?
Yes.
And how are we going to do that? And there isn't an easy answer. There isn't a tool that can solve that problem, but there's definitely some work to be done in order to figure out how to make sure that you're staying on track with what that vision is.
And the other thing with it being a newer industry, part of what I have grown to love about the internal communication profession is the community that we've built. I did an exercise a few months ago about personal values And the two that I narrowed down to for myself were compassion and community. And that's what I love about the internal comms world, is that it's this really empowering, supportive community of professionals. I have yet to meet someone who has refused to help or chat or, share ideas. So I think for anyone who's newer to the industry, that is going to be the best part as you grow, is having this network of people who are all trying to do these amazing things together. And I don't know if any one person has it all figured out, but together, man, we're making headway for sure.
That's a solid point. And I can attest that going to events and just interacting on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, the community is wonderful. I mean, and it's like, even when talking to competitors, it's just such a friendly experience. It's like we're all just trying to do this thing that helps people be better and feel good about what they do every day. And that's pretty awesome.
It's pretty awesome. I wish we would acknowledge that more often. Like, we're all trying to, when I explain, this is my Uber driver pitch, when, you're chatting with your Uber driver, what do you do for a living? I'm here for a conference. Oh, what's it about? Internal communications. And then they always say, I don't know what that is. And I always say, I help employees enjoy going to work. What an awesome role, right? I help make people's workplaces more enjoyable. Everyone wants to look forward to going to work. So
absolutely the best. That's so cool. Kristin, this has been such a good conversation. I have my last and final question. It's my favorite question to ask is, I want to know what, if anything, super fun that you're working on today that you want to talk about.
Well, when you're me, everything is fun. So that's part of it. I did laundry today, which is maybe not fun, but very fun for me because I'm dog sitting. So I was getting blankets ready for my dog sitting friend. In all seriousness, though, building a business has been a journey of all kinds of roller coaster moments and fun and excitement and nervousness and fear and all those kinds of things. So I've been doing that since October. And then on the personal side of it, the building a life and working through the immigration process to move to the US. So that's been, I don't know if fun is the right word for that, but I'm trying to make it as fun as I can.
Wow. Well, that's really exciting. I mean, those two things combined. I mean, that is very exciting.
Yeah.
Probably a little stressful, but probably,
out of trouble for the most part. So
that's awesome. Oh, that's great. Kristin, I just want to thank you again. I'm certain that people are going to find everything that you had to talk about really helpful and will resonate very well, especially if you're new to the industry or if you're just trying to take a step back and you're in the grind and you just want to go, what am I supposed to be focusing on again? What is it, this thing that I'm supposed to be doing? Why am I here? And I think a lot of what you talked about, just going back, just understanding what your culture is and making sure that folks that you talk to simply want to show up on Monday. That's pretty great.
Internal comms pros we all need to put our crowns on and own our roles.
Yes. That was the other point you made. There was this power to be able to reach people on a level that I can't think of another field that can do that so regularly.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I wish you the best on your ventures ahead, and hope to see you in the United States.
Me too. Thank you, Jason.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We've got a ton of great content that covers the full journey of deploying a branded employee app. Go to staffbase.com, click on resources, and select Employee App Guide. That's it.